Right now, at this very moment, someone you once meant everything to is thinking about you, and they simply cannot escape it. They are not remembering you because they consciously want to revisit the past, but because their mind has found itself entirely unable to forget you. There is no message being sent your way, no words being spoken aloud into the physical world, and no dramatic confession unfolding. There is just an overwhelming, suffocating silence, but inside that heavy silence, something massive and irreversible is unraveling, something they tried desperately to ignore, something they buried under layers of pride and daily routine is now demanding to be felt with a frequency that is becoming impossible for them to tune out. They genuinely thought they had control over the situation and their own emotions. They thought that walking away, pulling back, or treating you like something temporary would bring them a sense of lasting peace. They convinced themselves that by making you smaller in their life, they would somehow become bigger, more independent, and more secure in their own world. But instead, that physical and emotional distance created something far more powerful and far more dangerous than attachment ever was. It created an undeniable, consuming absence. And absence does something incredibly dangerous to the fragile human psyche. It violently forces the mind to look directly at what it stubbornly refused to see before. When you were there, your presence was a constant stabilizing force. They took it for granted because it was always readily available to them. But now, your memory isn't soft, comforting, or gentle. It is razor sharp, it is invasive, it returns without their permission, creeping in during the quietest moments, in the late hours of the night when the world stops spinning. In the empty spaces where their chosen distractions once worked perfectly, but no longer hold any power. What they once had easy, unrestricted access to, your time, your energy, your patience, your pure heart, now exists only in fragmented memories that they absolutely cannot silence. And here is the brutal truth they are slowly waking up to. They are realizing it was never just about you as a person. It was about how you made them feel. It was the specific, rare frequency of safety and understanding you brought into their life. And now that feeling is entirely gone, and absolutely nothing they try can replace it. Regret does not arrive the moment something is lost. That is a common and comforting illusion we tell ourselves to survive the initial shock. In the immediate aftermath of a separation, when someone lets go of a deeply meaningful connection, their conscious mind usually justifies the decision very quickly. The ego immediately steps in, offering a vast library of reasons, logical explanations, and even a false sense of relief. It tells them they made the right choice, that they were protecting their independence, that nothing truly valuable was lost, and that something much easier and better will inevitably come along. On the surface, to the outside world and even to themselves, everything seems perfectly settled. They might even feel a surge of temporary empowerment. But beneath that fragile, curated surface, down in the deep, dark waters of the unconscious mind, something entirely different is unfolding. The unconscious does not accept the ego's shallow explanations so easily. It does not operate on convenience, social comfort, or pride. Instead, it records the truth in its rawest, most visceral form. It archives every genuine emotion felt, every moment of profound connection, and every subtle significance that the conscious mind actively chose to overlook in its frantic rush to stay in control. At first, this hidden psychological layer remains incredibly quiet. It is almost patient, sitting in the dark, waiting for the perfect moment to emerge. That moment usually arrives when the initial high of their so-called freedom begins to rot and fade. It happens when the external noise of their life no longer keeps their mind fully occupied. This is when regret starts to form, not as a clear, articulate realization, but as a subtle, pervasive disturbance. It begins as a physical restlessness, a feeling that the air in the room is suddenly too thin, a nagging sense that something is fundamentally not quite right. The person may not immediately understand what is happening to them. They might feel uneasy, unable to pinpoint exactly why certain thoughts of you keep returning to their mind uninvited. They might blame their mood on stress, on their job, on their daily routine. But the true source is much deeper and far more terrifying. The unconscious is beginning to push fragments upward into their waking life. Memories of your voice, sensations of your touch, emotions that were never fully acknowledged or appreciated when you were standing right in front of them. These flashes are not random. They are precise, targeted reflections of what was once deeply meaningful. What makes this internal process so incredibly powerful and terrifying for them is that it completely bypasses the protective walls of the ego. The very same ego that once proudly justified the loss, the ego that built a fortress of excuses around their heart, now struggles and fails to maintain its carefully constructed narrative. It cannot easily silence what the deeper mind is determined to reveal. The person starts to remember things differently. The filter of their pride is dissolving, leaving behind only the stark reality of what happened. Moments they once considered ordinary, boring, or routine begin to carry an immense, crushing weight. Past conversations replay in their mind with entirely new meanings, revealing the depth of your care that they previously ignored. The absence of what they lost becomes infinitely more noticeable, more physical, and more demanding than its presence ever was. This is the slow, agonizing awakening of regret. It is not a single lightning bolt realization that they can quickly process and move past. It is a gradual, relentless unfolding. The unconscious forces the individual to confront a brutal truth they were simply not ready to see before. That they did not fully understand or respect the true value of what they had. There is a terrifying inevitability to this psychological process that they cannot escape. The more someone tries to suppress these emerging, uncomfortable feelings, the stronger and more violent they become. Ignored emotions do not simply pack up and disappear. They ferment, they transform, and they return with far greater intensity. The unconscious insists on being heard, and regret eventually becomes its loudest, most demanding voice. It speaks through repetition, through heavy emotional weight, and through the quiet, stubborn persistence of memory. Over time, the person begins to connect these overwhelming feelings directly with their past actions. What was once a blind, unconscious drive to escape intimacy suddenly becomes a glaringly conscious awareness of their own self-sabotage. They start to see the massive gaps in their awareness. They see the exact moments where they failed to act, where they failed to appreciate you, where they failed to recognize the absolute rarity of what was standing right in front of them. This is not a comfortable or gentle realization. It carries a suffocating heaviness because it comes with the horrifying knowledge that it cannot be undone. The sharp clarity they possess now contrasts violently with the arrogant blindness they operated under before. This is exactly why true regret feels so all-consuming and inescapable. It is never just about missing someone's company or wishing they were there to pass the time. It is about being forced to face oneself. It is the devastating recognition that the loss was not simply a random event or a matter of bad timing, but a direct consequence of something deeply flawed within them. Their inability to see clearly, their fear of vulnerability, their desperate need to control the uncontrollable. The human mind has a very peculiar way of protecting itself in the moment, only to utterly betray that protection later down the line. When something deeply meaningful is slipping away, or when the intimacy becomes too terrifyingly real, the ego often dulls the intensity of the experience. It convinces the person that what is happening is not as significant as it truly is. It minimizes the emotions involved, actively avoids any discomfort, and chooses the illusion of control over the risk of vulnerability. In doing so, the ego creates a kind of psychological blindness, a state where the individual is present physically in the relationship, but not fully aware or engaged emotionally. They look at you, but they do not truly perceive you. They hear your words, but they do not deeply listen to the profound meaning hidden behind them. At the time, this emotional detachment feels like strength to them. It feels like clarity, like independence, like they are making a rational, level-headed decision to protect their own peace and maintain their autonomy. The ego thrives in this detached space because it maintains a strict sense of order. It keeps things simple, manageable, and strictly within the boundaries of what feels safe and predictable. But what the ego tragically ignores are the subtle, high-frequency emotional signals that carry the deepest meaning in a human connection. The small, selfless gestures you made, the quiet moments of shared connection, the unspoken, intuitive understanding that existed between the two of you. These things are not loud enough to demand the ego's attention in the heat of the moment, so they are incredibly easy to overlook and take for granted. However, the deeper mind, the soul, does not discard these experiences. It stores them carefully, meticulously, and completely. Every single moment of care that was dismissed, every genuine feeling that was suppressed, every beautiful detail about you that was not fully appreciated remains entirely intact beneath the surface, waiting in the dark. Once the situation has fully passed, once you are no longer present in their daily life, something fundamental shifts within their internal architecture. Without your presence triggering their fear of intimacy, without the immediate need to maintain their emotional walls and control the dynamic, the ego begins to lose its iron grip. The mind is no longer frantically focused on justifying decisions or maintaining a certain tough, independent image. It becomes quieter, more reflective, and dangerously still. And in that vast, empty quiet, the carefully stored experiences begin to rise to the surface. But they do not return in the same flat, dull way they were originally lived. They come back with a startling clarity, with an emotional depth and resonance that was completely absent before. The person starts to replay moments not because they consciously choose to reminisce, but because the mind aggressively brings them forward, demanding that they look at the truth. A simple, passing conversation that once felt completely ordinary now reveals layers of your patience and understanding that were entirely missed. A specific look you gave them, A tone in your voice, a gentle gesture, suddenly carries a massive emotional weight that was invisible to their blinded eyes at the time. The mind is actively reconstructing these memories with a brand new awareness, filling in all the emotional gaps that were previously ignored by the ego. This is where the true psychological tension begins to tear them apart. The ego, which once so easily dismissed these experiences as unimportant, now struggles violently to reconcile with the undeniable truth that the deeper mind is presenting. There is a rapidly growing, painful contrast between what the person arrogantly believed back then and what they are tragically beginning to understand right now. The false narrative they created to survive losing you no longer aligns with the emotional truth emerging from within their own soul, and so the internal replay continues, not as a passive, nostalgic memory, but as an active, exhausting process. The mind revisits the exact same scenes, examining them from different angles, desperately searching for understanding. It is almost as if the brain is trying to retroactively correct something to make sense of what was lost by finally fully seeing it now. But this newfound clarity arrives entirely too late to change the physical outcome, and that is the core of their torment. What makes this internal process so intensely painful is its sheer, relentless persistence. The mind does not simply move on after one brief moment of reflection. It returns again and again and again, each time adding more detail, more emotional weight, more agonizing clarity to the memory. The person may try to frantically distract themselves, to focus on new experiences, new hobbies, or new people. But certain memories of you remain completely untouched by these desperate efforts. They linger in the background, waiting patiently for any moment of stillness to resurface and strike. Over time, the person begins to realize that what they are experiencing is not a random bout of sadness or a fleeting wave of nostalgia. It is a direct, proportional response to what they once foolishly overlooked. The mind is not actively trying to punish them. It is simply revealing something that was always there, vibrating with truth, but never fully acknowledged. The replay is not just about nostalgia for the past. It is about understanding. It is about seeing with brutal clarity what was once hidden behind the cowardly comfort of the ego. There is a profound paradox in human emotion and connection that we rarely acknowledge. When something is constantly present, it often blends seamlessly into the background of life, becoming familiar, routine, and almost invisible in its consistency. But when that exact same presence is permanently removed, it does not simply disappear into the void. Instead, it transforms into something far more noticeable, heavy, and undeniable. Absence is an entity that echoes in ways that presence never could. When someone is a part of your daily experience, your mind naturally adjusts to them. Their voice, their unique energy, their attention. These things become woven into your baseline state of being. You do not question it because it feels completely stable. It feels expected, and what is expected rarely feels urgent or miraculous. The mind does not highlight it as something extraordinary because it lazily assumes it will always continue to be there. This is where the subtle, creeping danger lies in all human relationships. The more constant and reliable something is, the less consciously it is valued by an unawakened mind. But once that reliable presence is gone, the mind is violently forced into an entirely different state of existence. It can no longer rely on the comfort that was once naturally available. And in that jarring shift, something massive begins to emerge. The absence you left behind is not an empty space. It is filled to the brim with sharp contrast. Every single moment of their day that once included you now feels fundamentally altered. The silence in their life is not neutral. It is not peaceful. It carries a crushing weight, a glaring difference that is physically impossible for them to ignore. This is where the psychological echo begins its work. The mind starts to notice the gaps, the specific spaces where your energy used to exist. It could be in their small morning routines, in certain times of the afternoon, in habits that no longer hold the same feeling of safety. These gaps are not just practical changes in their schedule. They are deep emotional voids. They remind the person again and again in an endless loop that something profoundly meaningful is missing from their world. Unlike presence, which can so easily be taken for granted by a fearful ego, absence demands undivided attention. What makes absence so unbelievably powerful is that it acts as a massive amplifier for what was once considered subtle. The specific qualities about you that were overlooked. The way you truly listened when they spoke. The way you intuitively responded to their moods. The quiet, stabilizing comfort of your mere existence. These things now stand out with a terrifying clarity. It is exactly as if the mind has turned the volume up to the maximum level on everything that was once ignored. And because there is absolutely no new interaction with you to balance, update, or soften these memories, they become permanently frozen, highly defined, and intensely magnified. The person begins to feel this lack in the most unexpected, jarring ways. A familiar situation arises in their life, but it feels hollow and incomplete. A funny or profound thought occurs to them, but there is no one who would understand it the way you did, no one to share it with. These moments create a violent emotional dissonance, a sudden, sharp recognition that something vital is missing, coupled with the devastating realization that it cannot be easily replaced by anyone else. This is exactly why absence echoes so much louder than presence. Presence is experienced in real time, often heavily filtered through distraction, daily routine, and the ego's obsessive need for control and independence. But absence removes all of those filters. It violently strips the experience down to nothing but memory and raw feeling. And in doing so, it forces the mind to witness the true, unadulterated impact of what was once there. The echo is not a constant, blaring noise that they can eventually tune out. It is selective, precise, and insidious. It appears in moments of absolute stillness. When the mind is not occupied with tasks, it surfaces. When something random triggers a memory, a smell, a song, a phrase, it surfaces. When a familiar behavioral pattern is interrupted because you are not there to complete it, it surfaces. Every single stage of this exhausting psychological process, from the initial unconscious denial to the final, painful clarity, uncovers a very simple, universal truth about human nature. We so often do not possess the vision to see the true value of something while we still have the precious chance to experience it fully. The fragile human mind protects, it delays, it distracts, and it endlessly justifies its own fears. But eventually, inevitably, it reveals the truth. And when it finally does, it leaves absolutely no room for illusion, excuses, or hiding. What remains after the fire is pure, unadulterated awareness, a deep, permanent understanding of what was truly real, what was foolishly overlooked, and what can never, ever be recreated in the exact same way again. This realization is incredibly heavy to carry, but it is also the most honest thing they will ever experience. It forces massive, undeniable growth, even through the most intense psychological discomfort. And perhaps when all the pain settles, that is the deeper spiritual meaning behind it all. It is not a cosmic punishment, but a necessary transformation. Because once someone has been forced to truly, deeply see the profound value they failed to see before, they can never return to that same state of arrogant blindness again.